Hey, thanks for joining me on this Developer Innovation Day session. My name is Mike Jerome, and I am the product manager for Amplify Hosting. So today, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to AWS Amplify. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on Amplify Hosting. Then we're going to discuss 3 different front-end delivery techniques for web apps. And then finally, there's a demo. We're going to deploy a Next.js application that uses SSR to Amplify Hosting. So what is Amplify? If you haven't heard of Amplify before, it's a suite of tools that let you build web and native apps. So we have libraries for web and mobile frameworks that make it easy for you to integrate Amplify's managed services into your app. So if you need authentication, for example, we support web frameworks as well as Android, Swift, and React Native. With those libraries, we also have UI components. So again, thinking about authentication, we can provide the components for the login screen and the password reset flow. Amplify also has a CLI, command line interface, to manage the services, so you don't have to do everything through the console. We have a product called Amplify Studio. Now that's a visual interface to create backends and cloud-connected user interfaces. And last but not least, we have Amplify Hosting, which is for web apps. And that's what we're going to look at today. So the core of Amplify Hosting is that you store your application code into a Git repo. And then every commit that you make to that Git repo results in a CI/CD process. That's continuous integration, continuous delivery process that will run tests on your code and then show the change in a preview environment. So all of this is delivered via a managed CloudFront CDN, and that includes things like the DNS configuration and the SSL certificates. And the hosting is integrated with Amplify's services, so things like the UI components, and also wider AWS services. So that's things like CloudWatch, and we'll see that a little bit later on in the demo. So there's a lot of moving parts to hosting a modern web app. And what I'm trying to show you on the screen here is the key parts of the infrastructure that you would need. So if you think about the top half of serving your customers, you need to manage your DNS, usually with something like Amazon Route 53. You would need to manage secure connections and SSL certificates, so something like AWS Certificate Manager. You'll no doubt want your content and your assets to be close to your customers, so you would use a CDN like Amazon CloudFront, which has over 200 points of presence around the globe. You need a place to keep your assets. That's things like your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, so they typically live inside an S3 bucket. And then if your application is dynamic, you're going to need things like gateways and lambdas. So that's kind of the hosting environment that you need to serve your content to your customers. But you also have requirements as a developer. So you need a Git repository, you need integration with that Git repository, and you also need the facility to build and test your application. So that's the CI/CD. And when that's been successful, you need a mechanism to deploy that either to a preview environment or into your live environment without taking downtime. So you have a 0 downtime deployment. So managing all of these components can be a lot of work and a lot of overhead, but AWS Amplify Hosting manages them all for you. So you just need to think about your app and less about the infrastructure underneath it. So the benefits of using AWS Amplify Hosting are you get performance and scale from Amazon's CDN. Because it's a managed service, we take care of the infrastructure for you, so it's reliable and it reduces your operational overhead. And you have cost-effective performance. You're only going to pay for what you use, and there's no per seat or per user licensing. And last, because it's a managed service, you concentrate on securing your app code and you leave securing the infrastructure to AWS. Okay, we're going to change gears now. We're going to look at some different front-end delivery methods that you would use on the web. First up is CSR, which stands for client-side rendering, and it's commonly used with React apps. Now, what happens here is your application is JavaScript. It sits on a CDN, and your customer downloads that, and then they run JavaScript, and the rendering of that HTML is done by your customer's device. So it's great in that it's dynamic, but because you're putting the job of rendering the HTML onto the customer's device, you can't control the experience they're going to get. If they have a low-end handset, for example, the site may be very slow to run. And because you're delivering everything as packaged JavaScript, it's not possible for the search engines to read your content, and therefore sometimes SEO can be a lot more challenging with this approach. As you can see on the diagram on the right of the screen here, very often you download all of the app and the code and you render it, and then you're making further calls to APIs to fill in the dynamic content. So that's one approach, popular approach. Now, the second method we have is SSG, or static site generation, and this was very much popularized by something called Jamstack. Now, in this approach, the HTML is rendered by a server rather than by the customer's browser, and it's done before the request is made by the customer. So you prepare the site now, it's sitting on a CDN, and then when a customer requests the app or the page, the HTML has already been rendered and it's sent straight to their device. So it's super fast, it's great for SEO, but because you've prepared that HTML ahead of time, it's not as dynamic as using CSR. So you may then have to make further requests via APIs, etc. So you've got the contrast of the two there. Now, there's a third option, SSR, and this is where we still have the rendering done by a server rather than by the customer's device, but we do it when it's requested by the customer rather than beforehand. So this is great because you get a faster time to content for customers compared to the CSR, and it's great for SEO, and it's more dynamic than SSG. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks approach. So all three approaches have valid use cases, and there's no one best approach, but SSR is very often like the sweet spot, and so that's what we're going to look at in a little bit more detail today. So we're going to focus on Next.js today. Now, if you're used to being a React developer, what you'll see on the page here is the top function called page is effectively a React component, and that is what is seen by the browser. So we can render that on the server and send the results of that to a browser. And then the second method, get server-side props. This is the magic function that happens on the server side. This is the SSR. And so in this method, you do things that only run on the server and never run on the client. So you can make calls to private APIs, maybe query a database, do all sorts of stuff like behind the scenes. And you send the results of that through props back to the main page. So this way you've got the security and the speed of things that happen on the server that are then passed over, the results of which are then passed over to the client. So let's dive in and show a demo and see what that would look like in action. So this is an app that we're going to deploy today. My app is called iDay, and it's a Next.js app. First thing I'm going to do is just jump over to the Amazon AWS console, log in here. And within my list of services, I am going to go to AWS Amplify. Now, if you've never visited AWS Amplify before, this is the screen that you'll be greeted with. And we're going to go ahead, click Get Started. And then we are going to choose today to host a web app. So I'm going to click Get Started beneath where it says Host Your Web App. Okay, and we talked about already a key to the service is the integration with a Git provider. And you can see here we support GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, AWS Code Commit, and it is possible to do a manual upload. The app we're going to deploy today is on GitHub. So I'm going to choose GitHub, click Continue, and AWS Amplify hosting is going to read my GitHub details and pull down for me a list of my repos. And we see there the iDay repo, which is the one that we want to work on today. I'm going to deploy the main branch and just go ahead and click Next. Now, Amplify has detected that this is a Next.js app, and it's provided for me some great build and test settings that are suitable for my application. So I don't need to make any changes here. I can go ahead and click Next. I can review the settings just to confirm this is coming from GitHub. It's my iDay repository, and this is going to be a Next.js SSR application, and we're going to go ahead and use the auto-detected settings. Clicking Save and Deploy takes that code and starts the process of building a new Amplify app. Okay, so this is our iDay app. It's in the process of being provisioned right now. So where we looked at that slide earlier with the outline, we're provisioning new SSL certificates, we're provisioning a CloudFront instance, S3 buckets, the runtime environment we need, the code build environments. We'll then run our first build, run through CI/CD and deploy that. That just takes a couple of moments while all the infrastructure is spun up and the application is built. So I'm going to just jump across and give you a little bit more insight into what the demo is going to look like and how it works. So we're just having a very, very simple demo today. We have a home page in our Next.js application sitting at index. And this is a real live version of what we saw on the slides earlier. So these first 13 lines are the output that we're going to be passing to our customer's browser. And you can see there's several div tags here, which are just used for layout. And then the key content is on line 7, where it says this page was server-side rendered on, and then there is a prop here called SSR date. That SSR date was passed into the function. Now, in order to render this, this is where we use the get server-side props. So this part of code only runs on the server, and you can see it grabs a date and time, SSR dates, and that is a JavaScript function. It's a new JavaScript date, and then we apply some formatting to it so we can see the date and the time zone. We then log our output with the variable. Now again, this is console.log, but this code runs server-side, so you will not see this in your browser's console. This is getting logged to CloudWatch. And then once we've made that log, we return the date as a prop there, which is fed back up to here. And that is how we're going to see the end results onto the screen. So it's all in one file, and it's a relatively simple demo. If I flip back now in my application, we can see that it's gone through the process of the provisioning, then it has built the application and finally deployed it. And I can dive in and see a little bit more detail there. So you can see the provisioning process. As we got the infrastructure ready, we had a front-end build, and you see here it has built the Next.js application and the various pages. We did not have tests configured today, so there's nothing to see there. We went straight on to the deployment, which is completed. And we have an app that's now online on the web. You can click this link here. And this is our very, very simple app. And we can see here, this page was server-side rendered today at 3:28 p.m. UTC. And I'm just going to take copy of this page was, as we will need that later. So jumping back to my console, we can see I've got lots of information about my app here. So right now I have one branch. If I had multiple branches in GitHub, I would be able to click on connect a branch, and this could be a feature branch or a staging branch or something that I was working on, and that would build inside the app, but in its own environment. So it would have its own CloudFront distribution, it'd be separate from my production environment, but it would be a great real-life place to test things out. I can do things like add custom domain names. If I have something registered, I want to use my own domain name. Previews, they're another great feature. So you can set up your GitHub repo to allow pull requests, and we will monitor that. If we see a new pull request is open, we will spin up a complete copy of the app in a new branch away from your production environment, but we'll build it full in its entirety, including running tests, and it'll be there for you to try it out and test it. And when you're happy, you can click Merge Pull Request. We'll then tear down that environment and deploy those changes into production for you automatically. There's a ton of other stuff you can do as well. So for example, you can set up notifications when builds succeed or fail. You can manage access control. So if you have a development branch or a staging environment, you can put that behind a password so it's not available on the internet. And then we also have monitoring. So we can see our application here. We can see the traffic that's coming into the site, our error rates. It's possible to configure alarms. So if we want to be notified, for example, if there's a jump in the number of requests or the number of errors. So we have some management. We can see full access logs for every client that has access to the website. And then we also have the compute logs. These compute logs are integrated with and sent to CloudWatch, so you can perform far more advanced alerting there. If I just jump across here, we'll see the logs that we've generated just from that page load that I created. And I think if I search all of my log streams and I search for this page was, actually, I think it was console, we should see this is a console log from get server-side props, April the 14th, 3:28:23 p.m., which aligns exactly with the demo that we had there. So we can see the server-side logs have gone through. So that's kind of very quick run through, but hopefully shows you how quick and easy it is to deploy a Next.js application to Amplify hosting. So let's recap. We've covered today an overview of Amplify, a little bit more detail in Amplify hosting, common ways of delivering content to the front end with CSR, SSG, and SSR. And then we've run through a demo where we have built and deployed a Next.js application to Amplify hosting. So if you'd like to ask questions, please do so in the chat. Very happy to answer those. Yeah, lastly, if you want to try Amplify for yourself, you can go to the AWS console, or there's a shortcut here, scan this QR code, and it'll take you straight to our homepage.